Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of today's headline. And I have, as usual, Akhilesh with me. And today we will talk about the economic impact of Russia Ukraine war. How is it going to affect India? Now, as we all know, Akhilesh, Russia Ukraine war started on the 24th of February. Russia invaded Ukraine. I wouldn't call it Russia Ukraine war. Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February, and since then things have continued. The skirmishes have continued. Bombing has continued. People have died in Ukraine. So that's it's been happening. Uh, India, of course, abstained from the UN resolution, the UN SC resolution, United Nations Security Council resolution. We abstained from voting. 11 countries voted in favor of action against Russia. We abstained from voting. We, China, and UAE abstained against voting. And of course, Russia vetoed it. So there it went down the drain. So that was how it is. And now, all that we've discussed, all that all of us we've talked about many times, Akhilesh, what I would really like to know is actually what is going to be the economic impact to India. That's the point. I would rather like to know what is going to be the economic impact globally, and then specifically, what is it going to be to India, Akhilesh?
Sujit, let's talk about it globally first. And before that, let's not really focus completely on the war, but let us see the sanctions the impact on the global economy starting from the sanctions which are being imposed. So there is a whole range of sanctions economic sanctions that are proposed to be imposed on on Russia, of course, headed by America. Now, what happens is you are trying to isolate Russia in the global economy. Isolating Russia in the global economy means cutting off a huge supplier of oil and gas, cutting off a huge supply of grain, cutting off a supplier of many commodities, and cutting off a supplier of a lot of other valuable minerals to global economy. That means that production supply is going to be disrupted worldwide. That also means that prices are going to go up worldwide. So that is one impact of the sanctions that we need to be bothered about, whose trickle effects will come down to India also. The second is, of course, the ruble is going to weaken substantially, and that is going to have an impact on the value of a lot of other currencies, including India versus the dollar, and also gold prices coming up. So this is going to be the general impact as far as economic sanctions are concerned being imposed on Russia. What does that mean to India, Sujit? The most obvious thing, global oil prices are going to go up. Global oil prices going up means that fuel in India, petrol and diesel, which are already so expensive, are going to get even more expensive. So will be the case of cooking gas. Let me remind you, we import 85% of our oil requirements and about 50% of our gas requirements. That means the oil price rise worldwide is going to translate into prices of petro products in India shooting up. Inflation will shoot up. They say that if the oil price goes up, the barrel price goes up by $10 to a barrel, then you have almost a 0.5% impact in inflation in India at the consumer price level. So we are going to see an upsurge in inflation. After the UP elections, you can be sure that the government is going to increase prices of petrol fuel all over again. So will be the case of diesel and cooking gas again. That's the first impact of inflation from the world coming into India. The second is there is going to be also disruption of the supplies that are taking place because you're going to have Russia being hit in a big way. So commodity supplies are going to be disrupted. Commodity prices will go up, which means the FMCG companies are going to be in quite a catch. Their commodity or rather their raw material prices are going to go up and they may not be able to pass on the entire increase in cost to the consumer. The consumer is already anyway burdened. So you're going to also witness the prices of all across the board items which hit the consumer also going up. That's going to be the second direct impact on us. The third is global supplies, global shipping lines, global channels of supply, the supply chain channels are going to be impacted because one large supplier in global commodity is going to be cut off. That is going to be impacting India's corporates, India's consumers, bottom line of corporates, and also the incomes, the household incomes of families in the country. So it's not going to be something good, Sujit.
Akhilesh, there's a question that viewer Yash, who's quite a regular viewer in our channel, he says, wouldn't there be, with all this, wouldn't energy prices come down with all these sanctions on Russia? Because we do, Russia exports a lot of energy.
Yeah, so energy prices wouldn't come down, they would shoot up. What happens is that if you are isolating Russia from the global economy to that extent, the supply of oil and gas from Russia is going to be cut off, which means the supply goes down, the demand remains as it is, and so prices will actually go up. So I would actually like to remind Yash that it's going to be the reverse, Sujit, that's going to happen. Further, as I was talking, Sujit, impact on the Indian economy, the rupee will weaken against the dollar. The projections are that in about 3 months' time, the rupee to the dollar will be about 76 to 77 rupees. Gold prices are expected to remain firm because gold finally becomes the wealth, the item, the asset, the commodity of the last resort. So gold prices are going to remain firm, and they are going to remain firm for quite some time, irrespective of and whenever the war comes to a closure. So those are going to be hardships that Indian consumers are going to face.
Akhilesh, a question that a lot of people have been raising is what we did in the United Nations Security Council. Was it a good thing by abstaining to vote? Was it good? Uh, to that, at least my view, Akhilesh, would be that looking at it from a national interest perspective, I think it was good. For the simple reason that end of the day, Russia had vetoed it. Number one. Number two is Russia has been constantly being supporting India since 1955, which I said it in my editorial too. So somewhere down the line, from a national interest perspective, yes, it is. It was a good decision of abstaining. But from a moral perspective, as a democracy, that we are, we should have stood by a democratic country, and when the moment a democracy is questioned or a democracy is crushed, we should have gone against it. So from a moral perspective, yes, but from a national interest perspective, I thought that decision was quite wise. Your opinion, Akhilesh?
Sujit, let's first be clear. We need to protect our own interests before we think of protecting other people's interests. It's like when you're, in a plane and they say if the cabin pressure drops, first put your oxygen mask and then put it on to others. That's what happens here also. Look at it like this, very dispassionately. China has been making all kinds of belligerent moves against India, including coming and occupying some part of Ladakh. It still remains in an extremely aggressive mode. We have more than 50,000 troops who have been stationed there now for over a year and a half. Did any of the European nation countries come and support us openly? They actually sided with their own interests because they did not want to anger China, which remains a major trading partner and a supplier of cheap commodities to them. So none of them really came out in the open, full throated or even half throated and said that what China is doing is wrong. So if anybody is trying to question us today on moral principles, I would like to say sorry. You really don't have the right to, impose or talk those kind of principles to us. If you had come running to say that an autocracy like China is trying to mess around with a democracy like India, and you had stood by firmly and made open statements in international forums, we of course don't need any support from them. We are an extremely self-dependent power. But none of them were out in the open vocally in international circles that I remember where they openly sided with India. That really did not happen. So let the European Union not give us lessons about protecting democracy or otherwise. We have our own interests to protect. And what are the interests? We have a neighbor, which is China, which is extremely belligerent. It is trying to encroach upon us, trouble us in some way or the other. And as part of that, we need to remember that Putin and Xi Jinping, they may not be the best of friends, but their interests are aligned at the same line as of today. And we need to have Russia on our side also to keep a check on China. So, what India did was the correct thing to do. We need to defend our interests first before we defend others. And if you're talking about defending democracy, let us be so strong And after that, we'll think of protecting democracy worldwide, everywhere else. Are we able to protect democracy on our own borders? Have we been able to protect democracy in a country like Pakistan? What could we do? Did we do anything about democracy in Afghanistan, in Burma, all countries around us, Sujit? So when we do not really have the power to go and protect it ourselves, then I think we'd rather look after our interests. And I would actually agree with what the government of India did. Morally, also, I think we were right. Practically, we were right. Strategically, we were right. It's another thing that, yes, all of us know that it is wrong on the part of Russia to have gone and attacked Ukraine in such a blatant manner. It is utterly wrong. And the world knows that India does not approve of it at all. Diplomacy is another thing. But if you ask every Indian on the street and in the house and in the office, he is going to say that Russia is the aggressor and it needs to be punished. So I think we need to be very mindful of these nuances before we probably say whether India was right or wrong.
Correct. I agree to you. We should look at our national interest first. Now, tell me, looking at national interest alone again, Akhilesh, what happens to our trade? What happens to our trade with European countries? What happens to our trade with US? What happens to our trade with the 11 countries that's sided with the US resolution or whatever UN resolution, UNNC? What happens to our trade with them?
I think, Sujit, India is too big a country to ignore, too big an economy to ignore, and too big a market to lose out for anybody. Let's first be clear. Second is, I haven't seen anybody making extremely strong statements against India or questioning us. In fact, the US made a statement to say that they understood India's position. So I don't think India's trade or economic interests are going to be affected at all whatsoever. On the other hand, our interests with Russia remain as they are, and Russia, please remember, remains a major arms supplier to India. We cannot lose out on that. It also remains an energy supplier to India, so that remains. So I really do not think India's economic interests are being compromised in any manner by having, abstained from voting on that resolution. We did it not once, but we did it twice.
That's a very interesting question by Nijas Pillai. What he says is, he says, do you think Gulf countries are happy with this war due to increase in gas price?
This happiness or this advantage always proves to be short lived. So, in the short run, the prices would remain so. That doesn't mean that demand is going to remain what it is. There's a limit to which people do spend on oil, especially in countries in Africa, South America, we see. And so, in the short run, there would be a bit of a benefit that they do get. But in the long run, all of it does get even out. So, yes, they should be cheerful at the moment. But how long is the question?
But like yes says, Saudi Arabia did support Russia. Not even now, even before they have supported Russia. So it's been a trend. So it is not like now all of a sudden, the UAE and other countries, other Middle Eastern countries are supporting Russia. So to that extent,
Sujit, if you,
we
you
can.
if you even talk about the support that came to Ukraine from the bloc led by United States, consisting of America, Canada, the European Union, if you look at their initial behavior, they were all trying to almost give sermons. They were all willing to be cheerleaders. Nobody was willing to jump into the fray. It's only since yesterday that things have changed. When France very openly said we are sending arms, Germany very openly came out and said they are sending 5,000 Stinger missile and anti-tank missiles. Then Finland also came out. Sweden has come out in the open. Otherwise, till the time they did not see Russia really getting aggressive in Ukraine and showing that they are really fighting a war, and till the time they themselves did not feel very threatened, such that they also thought that they need to be united in their response and also provide military support to Ukraine, they were all sitting in the fence. So if you look at that behavior also of theirs, everybody was mindful of their own interests. You take the case of Germany. The Eastern European nations have been insisting time and again to cut off Russia from the SWIFT system worldwide, the system of the payment communication system worldwide, which is considered to be the financial backbone of the world. All right, many countries, especially the East European countries, have been demanding cut off Russia from it totally. And who would be stopping that primarily? Germany would be stopping that because it did not suit the economic interests of Germany. So if anybody is trying to give any kind of sermons, let's be clear, everybody is trying to be mindful of their own interests. India also needs to do that, and we are doing it.
Absolutely, I agree, and we did what we had to do. Fair enough. I am agreeing to that. The point is, Akhilesh, do you think do you think, before I come to Vikram Shetty's question, which is a very interesting question, before I come to his question, do you think that this entire attack was planned? You see, look at it from two perspectives. Perspective number one, right after the pandemic. I mean, when pandemic was, I'm not saying after the pandemic, one should not use such words because you never know. But right after the third wave, okay, no country is economically that comfortable to wage a war or to stand by any country to fight a war. I think I have lost Akhilesh. So I anyway, my question was that, you see, no, I personally think that this entire war was planned. It was timed very well. Timed very well for two reasons. One is the fact that it was okay. Akhilesh is back, so I will just take him back, and then Akhilesh, we lost you for a minute.
Yes,
You're back now. So I'm
yes,
just going to ask you this
yes.
question once again. See, what I was saying is, sorry, I'm like doing this the third time, but all the same, viewers. Akhilesh, my question is, this was timed well. It was timed well because the world is just over with wave three pandemic, so nobody is economically that comfortable. B, USSR, sorry, Russia had their person as the chair in UNSC. So it was timed so perfect, isn't it?
I think it was not just perfectly timed, it was also well prepared. And to me, Russia was watching all the moves starting from the way the US exited out of Afghanistan. I think that was a major signal for Russia to think that the American public, the American polity, the American politician has lost an appetite for fighting any kind of a war or getting into any kind of a military expedition. So I think for Putin, that was a major development. Everybody was watching how America almost scampered out of Afghanistan. So the preparations mentally would have started then, and you did not amass to over 2 lakh troops and all the armaments and all the vehicles and fuel and all those supplies in a matter of weeks. It has taken months for them to prepare. In December onwards, in fact, the advisory had gone to many Indian students in Ukraine to start exiting the country. So everybody was aware of what could happen. The very fact that it has happened was very evident by the preparation that took place. So it has not been something unplanned. It is not off the cuff. It is not that suddenly Putin decided that, oh, let me teach Ukraine a lesson. We all saw it coming.
Correct. Vikram Shetty asks a question. He says, do you think the next thing going to happen is China attacking Taiwan?
Sujit, according to me, this, is of course sounds real at the moment because of one such attack happening in Ukraine. But I don't think something like this would happen. Between China and Taiwan versus Russia and Ukraine, there's a big difference. The big difference is that unlike Ukraine, Taiwan is very deeply interlinked and entwined into global supply chains. Please remember that it is the largest producer of chips in the world today. So Taiwan, first of all, is deeply entrenched in the global economy. The second is, unlike in the case of Ukraine, there's already a sizable presence of the American armed forces in and around Taiwan, whether it be in Japan directly or also by way of all the arms, a huge cache of arms that the US has been supplying to Taiwan all over the years. And US has been making very, very open statements that if you attack Taiwan, we are going to be into it. So I really don't think this case is going to come down to now China getting emboldened and saying, let's go and do a walkover into Taiwan. That's not going to happen. Yes, China has been indulging in a lot of saber rattling, but I think that's just for optics.
Before I get into my question, Vaibhav Katkar has just asked us a question where he says, "How evident is a nuclear war being engaged? How evident is it that this may turn into a nuclear war?"
I was just reading an article by a BBC correspondent, and he says that when uh, Putin annexed Crimea, he says before that, I always said no, he will never do it. And he says it happened. He says when Putin was again announcing that he is going to give a declaration of independence to those two breakaway regions of Ukraine, the correspondent says, I thought he will never do it. And see, he did it. And then when he was amassing troops, again we thought that he will never attack Ukraine, and he still attacked it. So when he says, the BBC correspondent says, that when you talk about a nuclear attack or some kind of a nuclear deterrent being imposed by Putin on the Western nations, you would normally say, oh no, he will never do it. The correspondent says, I've come to the conclusion that he will never do it. That term does not apply to Putin. What people are saying is perhaps that there might be some kind of a nuclear explosion that he might do between the territories of Norway and Britain, just as a demonstration. Again, it is, almost unthinkable that something like that would happen. And not because, Putin wouldn't do that, but because if Russia ever were to resort to it, you can be sure Russia as a nation will be history. You'll have all the major powers jumping into it, disarming Russia, like we saw what the US did with Japan and Germany after the Second World War. And I don't think that's the kind of legacy Putin would ever want to leave to Russia. One of the reasons he has attacked Ukraine is to build a legacy for himself in Russian history. I don't think he will want to leave that legacy. So it is only from that logic that I would say that no kind of a nuclear action is expected. As a normal person, as a normal human being, we all think it is too horrendous a situation to think of. But then we are talking about autocrats for whom the word horrendous perhaps doesn't apply. They are not even moved by it. The only thing that would apply here is I don't think Putin would want a legacy that Russia as a state got almost liquidated because he very foolishly pressed the nuclear button. So I don't think a nuclear war is going to happen in any way, Suji.
Akhilesh, let me go a step further. You see, Iran invaded a Kuwait. Okay, Putin, like you rightly said, annexed Crimea in 2014. This is, I mean, US randomly came into Afghanistan, made a mess of Afghanistan, and walked out overnight. And came the Taliban, who annexed Afghanistan, invaded Afghanistan. I am using the word invaded very, very responsibly, because a government that is not elected is invasion. So invaded Afghanistan. What is the world order? Is there something called as the world order? Is there something called as United Nations? United Nations has United Nations Security Council, which gives 5-member permanent seats, 15 members temporary seat. One member can just veto the entire thing, and everything goes down the drain. So, are we living in some rara land that we feel that there can be no invasion, there can be no one country trying to invade, to control the other country? Like we used to have it in the ancient times, when one king goes and rules, you have a Napoleon who's saying, "I'll rule the world." Is there? Do you think that all of this is over, or it can happen again anytime? It's the when America does it, it's they make it, the narrative is that it's all for peace. But when Russia does it, he does it brutally, and because that man is brutal, I mean, Putin is brutal, so he does it brutally. But end of the day, isn't that happening all over the world? And isn't this United Nations a mute spectator of this entire process? Akhilesh.
I would completely agree with you, Sujit. The United Nations has proved itself to be completely impotent. The structure itself is wrong. You have 5 members who are the permanent members of the Security Council, and they can veto anything at their own sweet will. Now, these are the
Correct.
ones who were the original nuclear powers, and these are the ones who have always engaged themselves in war. Let me make it very clear. The US has engaged in thoughtless wars. The UK was always into it. France was always fighting wars. Russia was into it. And of course, China is no less. So you have the warmongering nations who are the Security Council's permanent members, and it is they who veto anything that they wish to do at their free will. I think the entire structure of the United Nations itself is flawed. It's a hypocrisy. It's not something that is really workable. The only reason it continues is it suits the interests of all the rich nations to stand on a pedestal and give up, their own lectures and bhashans to those poor nations or to those nations who are not so powerful as they are. Otherwise, as a system, as a system of deterrence, as a system of moral authority, as a system that is expected to uphold ethical democratic principles worldwide, I think it has been a complete failure. You see the blatant way in which at that time USSR entered into Afghanistan and had to run back later down the line. You see how USA got into Afghanistan so blatantly, it got into Iraq, it fought the Kuwait war, or you look at the Middle East itself. You look at the way ISIS suddenly came up, and it's some remnants of it are still there. These things have been happening all the time. You see the way in which China belligerently keeps demanding give us Taiwan back. You see how North Korea continues to keep blasting all its missiles and try to blackmail the world at large. the fact of the matter is, I really do not think there is an international order that is working. In fact, till the time you had two powers, which was USSR and Russia, it worked to a large extent because you had two powers keeping a check on each other. The day USSR got liquidated and there was only one power up to now so far is when all the chaos suddenly became, it was an open land for USA to do what it does. Otherwise, tell me why, Sujit, should USA as a country maintain 800 military bases worldwide? There is a need for it. And it is through all these that you see all these kind of actions taking place. You rightly mentioned that US got into Afghanistan and made a mess of Afghanistan, but in return, in these times, it also made a mess of itself. It has lost trillions of dollars, and that is now showing on the impoverished US economy. So the fact is, there isn't any world order. There isn't any one institution which can guarantee you world peace, world democracy, sovereign rights of nations, etc. It is just that the powers are going to meddle into each other's affairs till a point comes when again there are a couple or more of global powers which have the capacity to keep a check on each other. And I think only that will sustain some kind of a semblance of rights of nations being protected. Otherwise, see how blatantly and in what an atrocious manner Russia has just entered Ukraine and it wants to take over, or at least say you throw your president out and get a new regime. I mean, as we say in Hindi, "Baap ki kheti hai kya?" But that is what he has been doing.
Absolutely correct. There is a comment that Murli Krishna has made. He said you can't compare North Korea with America. I think America has been one of the most spoiled brat in globally. It's one of the most spoiled brat globally. They have a fantastic methodology. They have a fantastic system that can create global narrative, and they've got these cronies, countries who just go out and agree to everything that they say. So somewhere down the line, I think there is no debate on the fact that United Nations, United States is one of the most spoiled brat in the globe, and most of the mess that has been created in this globe has been thanks to United States and its wrong policies. Okay, it's what do you say? What do you call it? It's arrogant policies. Okay, thoughtless policies. I can go on and on. So I think let us be very
Sujit,
clear. Yeah.
let me point out, it has fought the maximum number of powers worldwide and lost most of them. It's just that it has had the money to be fighting wars, and now that money has come to an end, it does not have the capacity to fight wars. Otherwise, if it was vintage America, for all you know, you'd already be having American soldiers in Ukraine. It's just that their purses are empty. Otherwise, just go back in recent history. America did not win in Afghanistan. America achieved nothing great in Iraq. It did not get anything fruitful in Vietnam or whatever war that it has gone and fought into, whether for itself or for others. So the fact of the matter is that unless there are no, at least there are two powers are needed to keep a check on each other, you're not going to see responsible politics on a global scale being played by any nation, be it America, be it Russia, or be it China, or for that matter, even India when India becomes a global power.
Correct. See, like one more comment from Murli. I want to answer him because it's basically it's only fair that he has answered, so I need to answer him. See, we send children to America. That doesn't mean that America is a good country. Please, I mean, let's face facts. So a lot of people at lot of times have gone and worked with China also. That doesn't mean that China is very favorable to India. A lot of people buy goods from China also even today. That still doesn't make China the best country. So I think we have a wrong idea of what about a good country and
No, Sudip,
country was not.
let me point out, and I would like to tell this to Murli. We are talking all this with particular specific reference to a war in a country being imposed by another, and what are other nations doing. We are not trying to pass general comments on America as a country. We are talking with only reference to this particular point. Otherwise, we all know it is a powerhouse of technology. We also know that it has been a country which has managed to monopolize global capitalism. We also send our children there for the education systems that they have, which are much better than those in India. So we are not trying to write off America and call it that way. We are talking from a very limited and relevant perspective.
No, I think Akhilesh, I believe is America has only one interest, and that is their own. Okay, if you have
Absolutely.
only one interest and that is your own, then you should not stop. You should stop commenting on other people's interest. Okay, you should stop interfering with other people's life, because your interest is just your interest. Okay, you are not interested about others. You should stop being a global leader and all that, which they which they profess themselves to be. The point that I'm trying to make is, somewhere down the line, yes, America is a big nation. It has got a lot of money. It has a, it gives a lot of aid to a lot of country and all of that. But end of the day, most of the things that America does is for America and not for anybody else. Let us be very clear about that. They are very successful. That is good. They're efficient. Hence, they are successful. I agree. But that the story ends there. Let it not go beyond that. Anyway, let's come back to our story, Akhilesh. Akhilesh, tell me, when it comes to the future, okay, if this is going to be the order of the day, like somebody asked, can Taiwan be, can China now do the same to Taiwan? Okay, if this is going to be the order of the day, where are we headed to? Are we heading ahead or are we going backwards? Because this seems to be going backwards, because now invasion seems to be something that's happening quite frequently, by the way. So where are we going with this?
So, Sujit, this attack of Russia on Ukraine is certainly an extremely regressive step, and it is already resulting in a lot of long term changes in the world order. You take a cue from the German president. He announced today that Germany is going to spend $100 billion in calendar year 2022, which is in this year itself, in the next 10 months, on arms, arming itself and building its army. It has realized very clearly that it needs to build itself to defend itself. You will recall that after the Second World War, Germany had stopped really building a large army. It was not even allowed to do that. It had about 5 lakh, it had an army of 5 lakh men till East Germany was there. And after the East Germany, collapsed, it has had just 2 lakh men army. And that it has realized is not sufficient. So the first thing, nations are going to bolster their defenses for sure. Nations are going to be mindful of the fact that if they have a large neighbor at their border, which is more powerful than them, they are going to be certainly factoring that in their diplomacy, in their global diplomacy, also their diplomacy in the neighborhood around them. They are not going to be averse to go and build bridges with other nations, which help them to keep a check on the big neighbor at their own doorstep. So things are going to change for sure, and it is going to be more towards bolstering your own defenses, because the other thing Ukraine lesson has taught us is nations are going to be willing to say a lot of things in solidarity, but when it comes to fighting your war, you will have to fight your war. They are not going to send their boots on your soil. And so nations are going to be well prepared. We are so going to see that as a major lesson, as a major change in history, which is going to take place because of this particular war.
Correct, absolutely correct. uh, but there is a question from Bushra Sheikh. She wants to know, what if Russia legitimizes crypto as a legal tender? Can they do that, for starters?
They might just do that out of a sheer need. Look at it like this. The proposal is to cut Russia off, not completely, but most of its major banks from the SWIFT system. The SWIFT system, Sujit, is the global backbone. It's a messaging system. It is not a remittance system, but it is on the basis of SWIFT that global transactions take place. The banking system depends on the SWIFT, system which works out. Russia is a member of it. Now, if Russia is cut off, and Russia depends on the SWIFT system largely for its oil and gas supply exports, so if Russia is cut off, it will need an alternate system. It already has its own messaging system, but that is puny compared to what SWIFT is. SWIFT has got 11,000 member institutions, which are banks and financial institutions all over the world in over 200 countries and territories. Russia's system has got just about 400 members in 23 nations. So, Russia being cut off with SWIFT will need an alternate system to be able to continue its own international trade in some way or the other. And digital currency could become an option. So Russia is expected to try to further its own messaging system for its financial transaction. It will also depend on the one which is being promoted by China. But more than that, it might also look at crypto or a digital currency as an alternate. So for all you know, they might just legitimize the crypto for the time being.
So if crypto is legitimized, is it beneficial for India or not, Akhilesh? Will it be beneficial for India?
Their legitimizing it is not going to impact India, first of all. Of course, for all those who are crypto traders, speculators, and investors, if Russia was to do that, they can expect a spurt in crypto prices worldwide. But from the Indian perspective, nothing changes. The Reserve Bank of India is completely against having any kind of an official crypto as a currency or even as an asset. They are against it. They want a total ban on it. And that is why the government has come up with the CBDC, which is the central bank digital currency. So apart from crypto prices worldwide shooting up or going up or firming up because suddenly Russia decides to recognize crypto as a legal currency, beyond that, I really don't think India is going to have much of a change.
Okay, Akhilesh, I have a very basic question. Okay, the world has been de-escalating defense spends on their defense budgets. Okay, possibly because of pandemic and the health reasons. Okay, and that was a good sign actually. De-escalating spend on defense. Now, tell me, after this war, is there's so many questions here. Like Vikram asks, again, should army training be made compulsory? All of a sudden, there will be again a huge spend on defense by a lot of countries. Is this good for the world?
Defense spending is considered to be highly unproductive in the sense it's
Correct.
a loss to the nation. Like if you
Correct.
if you see the Kargil war that we recently fought, an estimate said that India was spending almost $1 billion a day to fight that war. So if the war would have continued for a month, it would have been $30 billion spent by India, money gone down the drain. So a spending on defense, which is essentially meant to not just protect yourself but also to be an aggressive force, is never a productive spending. Countries, of course, or economists like to argue to say that look at a case like Russia. They have such a huge defense industry. Hasn't that country really benefited? The answer is no. By spending or allocating higher amounts of money on defense, you are somewhere or the other compromising spending of money on social infrastructure, on education, on medical benefits, etc. And that is finally not really a positive sign as far as the economy, as far as the society of a country is concerned.
Akhilesh, my last question to you. We've got 3 minutes. I want to spend that 3 minutes looking at the future. So if you peek into the future, and if this is what the order of the day is, and this is how things are going to be, that I don't like you or I don't like the decision you take, so I come and invade your country. If that's going to be the order of the day, and you have countries like China, you have countries like Russia under Putin, and you have, and I'm sure there'll be few more countries that will pop up, maybe like you said, North Korea and others. What's the future? What are you seeing? What will be the first of all? What will be the economic future of our world? 2030, 2035.
So there are two sides of the coin. Excess spending, of course, is unproductive. But let me also give a bit of a condition to it. If a country is at peace, then you certainly have a stronger economy. So while a country will have to spend extra to remain strong and be able to protect itself, on the other hand, if it does that, then you're going to be having a country at peace which might be able to prosper, in terms of growth and development. So you're going to see a world, according to me, in a direction which is primarily headed to defending itself. So what would happen? Like Germany did, individual nations are going to ramp up their spending on defense. The other is, like we see trade blocks, there are going to be defense blocks like NATO or affiliates of NATO coming up in some format or the other, because the smaller nations are certainly going to see the need to group themselves, especially if there's a threat of any kind of an aggression or attack by any kind of a neighbor from close by or far away. So that's the other thing that will happen. In the long run, if by being strong, like if India is strong, able to defend itself, if because of that India is a peaceful nation, then you would find that finally peace is leading to growth and prosper and progress. I think that's the kind of world that I see in the coming years. A world spending more on defense, a world grouping together for its own mutual defense. But if that succeeds, then a world also progressing because countries would manage to create islands of peace where growth and progress would take place.
Akhilesh, I've got 1 more minute. I want to squeeze in that one more question in that 1 minute. Akhilesh, tell me, League of Nations changed into United Nations because they realized League of Nations is not working. Do you think it is time to change United Nations into something else?
You need to put United Nations and question mark. That is a change.
But no, isn't there a need for something more potent, something more
I
responsible,
think,
accountable?
Sujit, yes, I think, Sujit, there is a need for something far more genuine, far more realistic. This entire structure of five security members trying to veto everything that they wish at their whims and fancies is not going to sustain itself. The world, anyway, doesn't really have much of a respect for UNO today. And it also does not have respect for so many of UN institutions. See the way China has manipulated WHO. WHO did not even have the guts to say that perhaps the it is Wuhan from where the coronavirus came. It has just been a puppet in the hands of China. So if you look at the UN today, it has been an armless, powerless, impotent body which has not been able to drive its own objectives. And then individual wings of the UN like the WHO, etc., which have been funded by powerful nations, they find that their entire objective has been hijacked by the country concerned. So I really don't think the UN is serving a purpose which it ought to serve. Either there has to be an overhaul in the entire system that it operates with to make it more honest, to make it more genuine, to make it more grounded, and to ensure that it functions in a more realistic manner than just be a puppet in the hands of those five permanent security members. So I think some kind of a order has to change somewhere. How soon will it happen? We really don't know, because these five permanent members are not going to give up their hegemony so easily. They are going to try to hold on to their power some way or the other. It all depends on how the other nations in the world are able to somehow pressurize and start getting changes into it. Otherwise, the UN seems to have lost its purpose.
With that, Akhilesh, I agree to you 100% on this one. I think the UN has lost its purpose. I hope things are better. I hope our students come back safely. And that's with that hope and that pray. Akhilesh, thank you so much for talking to us. And I'll catch you day after tomorrow.
Thank you, Sujit.